In this video, I'm going to give some details about gait. I'm going to talk about some of the nomenclature and then some common things to know in the range of motion. So typically the gait cycle, there's two common terminologies that are used. There's what's called the standard terminology and the range of terminology. There are others. Those are the most common that are used. And in the Midwest, the most common thing to do is to kind of mix the two, which I'll explain in a minute. But first, I'll go through what they are. So for standard terminology, there's heel strike as the heel comes down, foot flat as the foot comes down, mid stance, heel off, toe off, acceleration, mid swing, and deceleration. Now in the range of terminology, that's going to be initial contact, loading response, mid stance, terminal stance, pre-swing, early swing, mid stance, mid swing, and then late swing. Okay. Like I said, in the Midwest, what's most common is to use the standard terminology for the stance phase and the range of terminology for the swing phase. So that would be heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, toe off, early swing, mid swing, and late swing. Another common way to refer to the gait cycle is in terms of percentages. So from 0 to 100%, so 0 being at heel strike, 8% is about foot flat, 30% is mid stance, 40% is heel off, 60% toe off, and then about mid swing is about 80%, and then as you come into, about to hit into that heel strike, that's about like 99%. So sometimes, especially for muscle activity, a lot of times they will give it in terms of percentage of gait cycle. It doesn't always match up neatly with the stages, so it's something to keep in mind. So another, that's a nomenclature that's commonly used. So in terms of range of motion at the hip, as you go into heel strike, you're about 30 degrees of flexion at the hip, maybe about 5 degrees of flexion at the knee, and then at the ankle, you're about maybe 5 degrees of plantar flexion. As you go into foot flat, okay, so the hip doesn't really change, but at the knee, you're actually a little bit more. You're actually a bit more like 15 degrees of flexion, and then at the ankle, you're actually about 10 degrees of plantar flexion. Then as you go to mid stance, you're about at neutral, okay? So you've gone from about that 30 degrees of flexion to about 0. You're about 0 at the knee, about 0 at the ankle, give or take a few degrees. As you go into heel off, now you're about 10 degrees of extension at the hip. You're starting to move towards flexion at the knee. And between, and you're still dorsiflexing. You actually do your maximum dorsiflexion from about kind of mid stance to getting to heel off. But somewhere between heel off and toe off, you go from, at the ankle, you go from dorsiflexion to plantar flexion. And you'll hit your maximum plantar flexion about 20 degrees when you go into toe off. Then getting back to the hip and the knee, so the hip, you're going to start about 30 degrees. You can go about 0, about 10 degrees of extension, and then after you hit that maximum 10 degrees of extension at about the toe off, then you're going to turn around, you're going to flex to take yourself through swing. Okay? At the knee, again, you're going to start off at about 5 degrees of flexion, more like 15 as you go into foot flat. Then you're going to kind of straighten up at mid stance. And then between mid stance and toe off, you're going to start flexing to about 30-some degrees by the time you get to toe off. And then you hit the maximum of about 60 degrees of flexion in order to be able to clear your foot through the swing phase. At the ankle, again, you're going to start at about 5 degrees of plantar flexion, actually about 10 degrees of plantar flexion to foot flat. Through stance, you're actually dorsiflexing. And then sometime between heel off and toe off, you go from that maximum 10 degrees of dorsiflexion to your maximum of plantar flexion, which is about 20 degrees for normal gait. And then after, obviously, once you push off, then you're going to dorsiflex a little bit to take yourself through swing. At the foot, so when I say foot, I'm talking primarily the subtalar joint. You actually come down in a little bit of an inverted position, maybe 2 to 3 degrees. As soon as you go, actually even before the loading response, basically as soon as your foot kind of hits the ground, you begin to evert. And you're going to evert all the way through stance, okay? And then about midway through stance, you turn it around and you invert. And you invert to your maximum at push off of about maybe 6 degrees. And remember, you want to do that. Why do you want to do that? Because you want to have your foot, remember eversion is a soft foot, loose pack position. You want to be in that soft position to take the weight. But then as you prepare for that swing phase, you want your foot to be rigid, like a lever, to make an efficient push-off. And so in that case, you want to be inverted. So at the foot you actually start inverted, you immediately start to evert all the way through about mid-stance, and then you turn it around, and then you supinate, or invert. And that's range of motion for the gait.